High above the Colorado Rockies, 35,000 feet from the safety of solid ground, 247 souls are about to discover that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on distant battlefields. They're fought in the thin air between heaven and earth, where split-second decisions separate heroes from victims. Flight 847 began as a routine journey from Denver to Washington, D.C. Passengers settled into their seats with books, laptops, and dreams of the destinations waiting ahead. Among them sat a woman carrying secrets that could change the future of American aviation. Secrets so classified that powerful people would kill to possess them and kill to protect them. But when catastrophic engine failure turns a peaceful flight into a death sentence, conventional procedures aren't enough. Survival will demand the impossible. Experimental techniques that exist only in classified military research, piloted by someone willing to risk everything, including treason charges, to bring innocent people home alive. This is the story of Captain Amanda Hayes, a former test pilot haunted by tragedy and bound by oaths of secrecy. When fate places her in the passenger seat of a doomed aircraft, she must choose between protecting national security and protecting human lives. Her decision will transform a routine flight into an epic battle against gravity, time, and the shadowy forces that value secrets more than souls. Welcome aboard Flight 847. Please share where you're joining us from as we prepare for takeoff into this incredible journey of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. Before we begin, tell us, what makes someone a true hero in your eyes? Is it superhuman abilities or the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when everything is on the line? Fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be the flight of a lifetime. The morning sun cast long shadows across Denver International Airport as passengers shuffled through the boarding gate for American Airlines Flight 847. Among them, a woman in her mid-30s moved with quiet purpose, her brown hair catching the light as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent. 32B, enjoy your flight, the agent smiled, but the woman simply nodded and proceeded down the jetway. Dr. Amanda Hayes carried herself with an understated confidence that most travelers missed. Her charcoal blazer was perfectly tailored, her black slacks pressed to military precision, though she appeared to be just another business professional heading to Washington, D.C. The leather briefcase in her right hand contained what looked like an ordinary tablet, but the device held flight data that could revolutionize American military aviation. She settled into her window seat, placing the briefcase carefully beneath the seat in front of her. Around her, the usual symphony of air travel played out. Crying babies, nervous first-time flyers, businessmen already buried in their phones. Amanda's green eyes swept the cabin with practiced observation, a habit she could never quite shake despite 5 years of living in the shadows. 3 rows ahead, an elderly man struggled with his carry-on. Without thinking, Amanda half rose to help before catching herself. Stay invisible, she reminded herself. Just another passenger. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Harrison completed his pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision of 20 years in military and commercial aviation. His weathered hands moved across the controls with muscle memory, each switch and dial as familiar as his own heartbeat. Beautiful morning for flying, First Officer Sarah Chen observed, adjusting her headset. At 29, she still felt the thrill of commanding a Boeing 777, though she missed the raw power of the F-16 she'd flown just 2 years earlier. Every morning's beautiful when you're not getting shot at, Hawk replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd seen too many sunrises over hostile territory to take peaceful skies for granted. The boarding process continued its familiar rhythm. Flight attendant Maria Santos welcomed passengers with genuine warmth, her 15 years of experience evident in how she effortlessly managed the controlled chaos of 300 people finding their seats. Amanda watched a young boy, maybe 8 years old, being escorted by a flight attendant to a seat several rows ahead. Tommy Rodriguez wore a Superman t-shirt and clutched a small backpack, his eyes wide with the excitement of flying alone for the first time. Something about his innocent courage tugged at Amanda's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," Hawk's voice filled the cabin. "We're expecting a smooth flight to Washington, D.C. today, with clear skies and light winds. Flight time will be approximately 3 hours and 15 minutes. Amanda closed her eyes as the engines spooled up, their familiar whine a sound that had once meant everything to her. She'd spent countless hours listening to jet engines, feeling their power translate through stick and rudder into pure flight. Now she was just a passenger, carrying secrets that could change everything. The Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to runway 25 right. Through her window, Amanda watched ground crews and service vehicles moving with choreographed precision. Everything looked normal, routine, safe. As they lined up for takeoff, she felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the magic of defying gravity. The engines reached full power, pressing her back into her seat as they accelerated down the runway. Flight 847 lifted off into the Colorado morning, climbing steadily toward cruising altitude. In seat 32B, Dr. Amanda Hayes appeared to be just another passenger beginning an ordinary journey. She had no idea that in less than an hour, her carefully constructed anonymity would shatter, and she would face the most important decision of her life. At 35,000 feet, Flight 847 settled into the rhythm of routine commercial aviation. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers began the familiar dance of reclining seats, retrieving laptops, and settling in for the journey ahead. Amanda Hayes opened her tablet, the screen displaying what appeared to be standard engineering reports. To any casual observer, she was reviewing technical documentation for her consulting work. In reality, she was studying classified flight test data from her latest project, an experimental control system that could maintain aircraft stability even with catastrophic engine failure. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was reviewing emergency procedures while flying as a passenger on a commercial aircraft. "Coffee or juice?" Maria Santos asked, her service cart stopping beside Amanda's row. "Coffee, black, please," Amanda replied, accepting the cup with a polite smile. The flight attendant's hands were steady, professional. Amanda noticed everything, the way Maria moved with practiced efficiency, how she genuinely cared about passenger comfort, the small wedding ring that caught the cabin light. These were the people she'd spent her career protecting, though they'd never know it. In the cockpit, Hawk monitored the flight management system while Sarah handled radio communications with air traffic control. The autopilot maintained their course toward Washington, D.C., following the invisible highways in the sky that connected America's cities. "Denver Center, American 847 level at flight level 350, Sarah reported. "American 847, Denver Center, radar contact. Proceed direct to Goodland." The routine exchange was as familiar as breathing. Hawk glanced at his instruments. Fuel flow normal, engines operating within parameters, weather ahead clear. After 25,000 hours of flight time, he could sense when something was wrong with an aircraft. Today, everything felt right. Amanda scrolled through her data, pausing at a section labeled Asymmetric Thrust Management. The research had cost the military millions of dollars and represented years of her life. More importantly, it had cost Robert his life when their prototype had encountered an unexpected control reversal during testing. She closed her eyes, pushing away the memory of that morning in Nevada. The screaming alarms, the aircraft tumbling out of control, Robert's voice calm and steady even as they both knew they were going to die. She'd ejected. He hadn't. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Amanda opened her eyes to find a concerned passenger in the aisle seat looking at her. She realized she'd been gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Just turbulence," she lied, forcing her hands to relax. The man nodded and returned to his magazine, but Amanda noticed he kept glancing her way. She needed to be more careful. Emotional control had kept her alive in test flights and kept her invisible in civilian life. Young Tommy Rodriguez had managed to charm the flight attendants into giving him extra pretzels and a pair of plastic wings. He was showing them to an elderly woman across the aisle, explaining with 8-year-old enthusiasm how airplanes stayed in the sky. "Okay, it's all about lift and thrust," he declared with absolute confidence. "My dad's a mechanic and he taught me everything." Amanda smiled despite herself. The boy's innocent fascination reminded her why she'd fallen in love with aviation in the first place. Before the classified projects, before the secrecy, before Robert died, flying had been pure joy. In the cockpit, Hawk stretched in his seat and checked the time. They were making good time, with favorable winds pushing them along their route. Sarah was proving to be an excellent first officer, her military background evident in her precise communication and attention to detail. "You miss it?" he asked during a quiet moment. "The Air Force?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted, "but I don't miss the deployments. My husband's happy to have me home every night." Hawk nodded. He understood the balance between duty and family, having made similar choices when his daughters were young. The military had given him purpose, but civilian flying had given him stability. Neither pilot noticed the subtle vibration that had begun in the number 2 engine, a frequency so low it was more felt than heard. The engine monitoring system showed all parameters normal, the vibration still within acceptable limits. Amanda felt it first. Her hand froze over her tablet as her body registered something her conscious mind hadn't yet processed. Years of test flying had given her an almost supernatural sensitivity to aircraft behavior. This wasn't normal turbulence or the usual sounds of commercial flight. She looked up from her screen, her eyes scanning the cabin for any sign that others had noticed. The passengers continued their conversations, reading, sleeping, lost in their own worlds. But Amanda's trained senses were screaming that something was wrong. The vibration was getting stronger. At 35,000 feet, Flight 847 settled into the rhythm of routine commercial aviation. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers began the familiar dance of reclining seats, retrieving laptops and settling in for the journey ahead. Amanda Hayes opened her tablet, the screen displaying what appeared to be standard engineering reports. To any casual observer, she was reviewing technical documentation for her consulting work. In reality, she was studying classified flight test data from her latest project, an experimental control system that could maintain aircraft stability even with catastrophic engine failure. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was reviewing emergency procedures while flying as a passenger on a commercial aircraft. "Coffee or juice?" Maria Santos asked, her service cart stopping beside Amanda's row. "Coffee black, please," Amanda replied, accepting the cup with a polite smile. The flight attendant's hands were steady, professional. Amanda noticed everything. The way Maria moved with practiced efficiency, how she genuinely cared about passenger comfort, the small wedding ring that caught the cabin light. These were the people she'd spent her career protecting, though they'd never know it. In the cockpit, Hawk monitored the flight management system, while Sarah handled radio communications with air traffic control. The autopilot maintained their course toward Washington, D.C., following the invisible highways in the sky that connected America's cities. "Denver Center, American 847 level at flight level 350, Sarah reported. "American 847, Denver Center radar contact. Proceed direct to Goodland." The routine exchange was as familiar as breathing. Hawk glanced at his instruments. Fuel flow normal, engines operating within parameters, weather ahead clear. After 25,000 hours of flight time, he could sense when something was wrong with an aircraft. Today, everything felt right. Amanda scrolled through her data, pausing at a section labeled Asymmetric Thrust Management. The research had cost the military millions of dollars and represented years of her life. More importantly, it had cost Robert his life when their prototype had encountered an unexpected control reversal during testing. She closed her eyes, pushing away the memory of that morning in Nevada. The screaming alarms, the aircraft tumbling out of control, Robert's voice calm and steady even as they both knew they were going to die. She dejected. He hadn't. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Amanda opened her eyes to find a concerned passenger in the aisle seat looking at her. She realized she'd been gripping her coffee cup so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. "Just turbulence," she lied, forcing her hands to relax. The man nodded and returned to his magazine, but Amanda noticed he kept glancing her way. She needed to be more careful. Emotional control had kept her alive in test flights and kept her invisible in civilian life. Young Tommy Rodriguez had managed to charm the flight attendants into giving him extra pretzels and a pair of plastic wings. He was showing them to an elderly woman across the aisle, explaining with 8-year-old enthusiasm how airplanes stayed in the sky. "It's all about lift and thrust," he declared with absolute confidence. "My dad's a mechanic, and he taught me everything." Amanda smiled despite herself. The boy's innocent fascination reminded her why she'd fallen in love with aviation in the first place. Before the classified projects, before the secrecy, before Robert died, flying had been pure joy. In the cockpit, Hawk stretched in his seat and checked the time. They were making good time, with favorable winds pushing them along their route. Sarah was proving to be an excellent first officer, her military background evident in her precise communication and attention to detail. "You miss it?" he asked during a quiet moment. "The Air Force?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted, "but I don't miss the deployments. My husband's happy to have me home every night." Hawk nodded. He understood the balance between duty and family, having made similar choices when his daughters were young. The military had given him purpose, but civilian flying had given him stability. Neither pilot noticed the subtle vibration that had begun in the number 2 engine, a frequency so low it was more felt than heard. The engine monitoring system showed all parameters normal, the vibration still within acceptable limits. Amanda felt it first. Her hand froze over her tablet as her body registered something her conscious mind hadn't yet processed. Years of test flying had given her an almost supernatural sensitivity to aircraft behavior. This wasn't normal turbulence or the usual sounds of commercial flight. She looked up from her screen, her eyes scanning the cabin for any sign that others had noticed. The passengers continued their conversations, reading, sleeping, lost in their own worlds. But Amanda's trained senses were screaming that something was wrong. The vibration was getting stronger. The memories hit Amanda like a physical blow as she stared at the failing instrument panel. The screaming alarms, the sickening sensation of an aircraft falling out of control, the desperate fight against physics and time. For a moment, she wasn't in the cockpit of Flight 847. She was back in the Nevada desert, watching her best friend die. "Amanda, we're losing it!" Robert's voice echoed in her mind, calm even as their experimental aircraft tumbled toward the desert floor. "The controls aren't responding." She blinked hard, forcing herself back to the present. The Boeing 777 was still flying, still controllable. This wasn't Nevada, this wasn't the end. "Talk to me," Hawk said urgently, fighting to maintain their glide as they descended through 25,000 feet. "What techniques?" Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of Sarah's seat. The last time she'd tried to save an aircraft with experimental procedures, Robert had died. The prototype's revolutionary control system had malfunctioned during their test flight, creating a control reversal that sent them into an unrecoverable spin. "I need to know your exact configuration," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Flap settings, current airspeed, center of gravity." Sarah rattled off the numbers while Hawk maintained their shallow descent. Amanda's mind processed the data with the speed of someone who had spent years calculating the impossible. "There's a technique called adaptive energy management," she began, then stopped. The procedure was classified, developed through years of secret testing that had cost millions of dollars and one precious life. Revealing it would expose everything, her identity, her work, the entire program. But looking at the altitude indicator spinning downward, she realized that secrecy was a luxury they couldn't afford. "It's experimental," she continued, "designed for exactly this scenario. Total power loss with the need to maximize glide distance and maintain control authority." "How experimental?" Hawk asked, his knuckles white on the yoke. Amanda closed her eyes briefly, seeing Robert's face in the moments before impact. He'd been trying to implement the same energy management principles when the prototype betrayed them. The investigation had blamed pilot error, but Amanda knew better. The system hadn't been ready. The theory was sound, but the execution had been flawed. "I helped develop it," she admitted, the words feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd sworn to protect. "It's never been tested on a commercial aircraft." The cockpit fell silent, except for the wind noise rushing past the aircraft and the steady chime of altitude warnings. They were passing through 22,000 feet, and Amanda could see the Colorado landscape growing larger through the windscreen. "What do you need from us?" Sarah asked, her military training overriding any questions about Amanda's background. "First, we need to understand what happened," Amanda said, moving to look at the engine displays. "Dual engine failure on a 777 is virtually impossible unless—" She studied the failure patterns, her trained eye catching details that civilian pilots might miss. "Unless what?" Hawk demanded. "Unless it was intentional." Amanda pointed to the engine parameters displayed on the screen. "Look at the failure sequence. Both engines went within seconds of each other, but the failure modes are different. Number 2 shows signs of internal explosion, but number 1—" She paused, her blood running cold. Number 1 was destroyed by an external device. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Someone had sabotaged their aircraft, turning a routine flight into a death trap for 247 innocent people. "Son of a bitch," Hawk muttered, then keyed his radio. "Denver Center, American 847, we have reason to believe our aircraft was sabotaged. Request immediate FBI and Homeland Security notification." American 847 copy sabotage. All agencies are being notified. What's your current status? Descending through 20,000 feet. Dual engine failure. Attempting emergency landing procedures. Amanda felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. These people, Maria Santos with her steady hands and caring heart, young Tommy Rodriguez with his Superman shirt and innocent excitement, the elderly man who'd struggled with his carry-on, they were all depending on her knowledge to survive. The same knowledge that had failed to save Robert. The energy management technique, she said, pushing away the ghosts of the past. It involves redistributing the aircraft's kinetic and potential energy to maintain control authority longer than conventional procedures allow. In English, Hawk said tersely. We're going to fly this aircraft in ways Boeing never intended, Amanda replied. We'll use controlled energy bleeding to extend our glide, manipulate our descent rate to maintain airspeed, and if we're very lucky and very skilled, we might be able to reach an airport. She looked out at the vast expanse of Colorado below them, calculating distances and descent rates in her head. The nearest suitable runway is Denver International, but we're too far out. We need something closer. There's a regional airport at Sterling, Sarah offered. Runway's only 6,000 feet, but it's paved. It'll have to do, Amanda said, then turned to face both pilots. I need you to understand something. What I'm about to teach you is classified military technology. Using it will expose a program that's cost billions of dollars and years of development. Hawk met her eyes steadily. Ma'am, I don't care if it exposes the location of Area 51. We've got 247 people on this aircraft, and right now, you're our best hope of getting them home alive. Amanda nodded, feeling Robert's presence like a benediction. This time she wouldn't fail. Then let's save some lives, she said. The aircraft continued its relentless descent through 18,000 feet as Amanda moved to the center console between the two pilots. Her fingers hovered over controls she hadn't touched in 5 years, muscle memory warring with the weight of secrecy that had defined her hidden life. First, we need to reconfigure for maximum efficiency, she said, her voice taking on the crisp authority of a test pilot. Sarah, I need you to extend the flaps to position 5, not the normal glide setting, but exactly 5 degrees. That's not in any emergency checklist, Sarah protested, even as her hand moved toward the flap lever. Because it's not a civilian procedure, Amanda replied. The angle creates a specific lift-to-drag ratio that maximizes our energy conservation. Trust me. Hawk watched Amanda's movements, noting the way she instinctively knew where every control was located, how she read the instruments with the fluency of someone who had spent years interpreting aircraft behavior in extreme conditions. This wasn't a weekend pilot, or even a commercial aviator. This was someone who had pushed aircraft beyond their design limits and lived to tell about it. You're military, he said. It wasn't a question. Amanda's jaw tightened. Was. Officially, I don't exist anymore. What branch? Sarah asked, extending the flaps to Amanda's specified setting. Air Force Test Pilot School, Edwards Air Force Base, class of 2015. The words came out like a confession, each one a violation of the secrecy oath she'd sworn. Hawk's eyes widened slightly. Edwards was where the military tested its most advanced aircraft, where pilots pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. Only the best of the best made it through test pilot school. She's one of us, he whispered to Sarah, using the phrase that connected all military aviators, regardless of service branch or era. The aircraft shuddered as they passed through a layer of turbulence, reminding them all that they were still falling toward the earth at over 1,000 feet per minute. Amanda's hands moved to the trim controls, making minute adjustments that seemed to smooth their descent. Now we implement phase 1 of adaptive energy management, she said, her fingers dancing across the flight management system. We're going to create a controlled energy bleed that maintains our optimal glide speed while extending our range. How? Hawk asked, watching her program settings he'd never seen before. By treating the aircraft like a sailplane instead of a powered airplane, Amanda explained. We use altitude as our energy bank and airspeed as our currency. The key is spending both at exactly the right rate to maximize our distance. She pulled up a display that showed their current glide path, a steep line that would take them far short of any suitable runway. Right now, we're following a ballistic trajectory, but if we manipulate our energy state correctly, we can stretch our glide by almost 30%. 30% might get us to Sterling, Sarah said, hope creeping into her voice. "It might," Amanda agreed. Then her expression darkened. "But first, we need to deal with whoever did this to us." She pointed to the engine monitoring display, where the failure signatures told a story of deliberate destruction. This wasn't random terrorism. The devices used were sophisticated, probably military grade. Someone wanted this specific aircraft to go down. The implications sent a chill through the cockpit. Amanda's mind raced through the possibilities. Her tablet contained classified flight test data, worth billions to foreign governments. Had someone discovered her real identity? Was this an assassination attempt disguised as a terrorist attack? "Denver Center, American 847, Hawk transmitted. "We're implementing emergency descent procedures and need vectors to Sterling Regional Airport. American 847, Sterling Regional is at your 2 o'clock, approximately 40 miles. Be advised, runway is 6,000 feet with no instrument approach, 40 miles. At their current descent rate, they would be lucky to make half that distance." "Time to earn our pay," Amanda said grimly. She began entering commands into the flight management computer, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had programmed similar systems under far more stressful conditions. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, watching unfamiliar parameters appear on her display. "Activating energy management mode," Amanda replied. "The computer will calculate our optimal flight path based on current atmospheric conditions, aircraft weight, and aerodynamic efficiency. It's going to feel strange. We'll be flying attitudes and speeds that seem wrong, but trust the system." The aircraft's nose pitched up slightly as the new flight profile engaged, trading airspeed for a shallower descent angle. The sensation was counterintuitive. Every instinct told them to push the nose down to maintain speed, but Amanda's system was doing exactly the opposite. "Airspeed's dropping," Hawk warned. "Let it," Amanda said calmly. "We're transitioning to minimum sync mode. The computer is finding the exact speed where we descend the slowest, while maintaining control authority." Through the cockpit windows, they could see the Colorado landscape spread below them like a vast map. Farms, roads, and small towns dotted the terrain, all potential crash sites if Amanda's experimental procedures failed. In the cabin behind them, Maria Santos moved through the aisles with professional calm, checking on passengers and preparing them for what might come. Young Tommy Rodriguez had stopped playing with his plastic wings, sensing the adult fear around him, even if he didn't understand its source. "Mom," he called to Maria as she passed his seat. "Are we going to be okay?" Maria knelt beside his seat, her voice gentle but honest. "The pilots are very good at their job, sweetie. They're going to take care of us." In the cockpit, Amanda watched their glide path slowly improve as the energy management system optimized their flight profile. They were still falling, still racing against time and physics, but now they had a fighting chance. "It's working," Sarah breathed, watching their projected landing point creep closer to Sterling Regional. "Phase 1 is working," Amanda corrected, "but we're going to need phases 2 and 3 if we want to actually land this thing." She looked at both pilots, seeing the trust they were placing in her experimental procedures and classified knowledge. The weight of 247 lives pressed down on her shoulders, but for the first time since Robert's death, she felt ready to carry it. "Tell me about phases 2 and 3, Hawk said. Amanda's smile was grim but determined. "That's where things get really interesting." The radio crackled with an encrypted transmission that made Amanda's blood run cold. The frequency was one she recognized, a classified military channel that shouldn't exist on commercial aircraft. "November 7 Alpha Tango, this is Raven Base. Acknowledge." Amanda's call sign from her test pilot days. Someone knew exactly who was aboard Flight 847. She reached for the radio, then hesitated. Responding would confirm her identity to whoever was listening, and in the current situation, that could be anyone from Pentagon officials to the same people who had sabotaged their engines. "American 847, this is Denver Center. We're showing you descending through 15,000 feet. Confirm your intentions." Hawk keyed the standard frequency. "Denver Center, American 847, implementing emergency procedures. We're attempting to reach Sterling Regional." But the encrypted transmission came again, more insistent. "November 7 Alpha Tango, Raven Base. Code Black authorization required for current procedures. Acknowledge immediately." Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she recognized the code. Code Black meant her experimental procedures were considered a threat to national security if exposed. Someone in the Pentagon was ordering her to let the aircraft crash rather than reveal classified technology. "What's that frequency?" Sarah asked, noticing Amanda's reaction to the radio calls. "Trouble," Amanda replied tersely. She made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She switched off the encrypted radio. "The energy management system has 3 phases," she continued, forcing herself to focus on saving lives rather than protecting secrets. "Phase 1 optimizes our glide ratio. Phase 2 involves controlled asymmetric descent using differential control surface deployment." "In English," Hawk said, fighting to maintain their shallow descent as they passed through 14,000 feet. "We're going to make this aircraft slip and slide through the air in ways that will terrify every passenger but extend our glide range," Amanda explained. "Phase 3, she paused, knowing that revealing the final technique would expose the crown jewel of her research. "Phase 3, Sarah prompted. "Emergency vector control. We use the aircraft's control surfaces to create artificial lift by manipulating airflow in ways that aren't supposed to be possible." Amanda pulled up a new display on the flight management computer, showing a 3-dimensional representation of their aircraft surrounded by airflow vectors. Every control surface becomes a tool for energy management. Rudder, elevators, ailerons, even the landing gear doors, we can use them all to squeeze every foot of distance from our descent. The technique had taken her team 3 years to develop and had cost Robert his life when they pushed it too far in the prototype. But on a stable commercial aircraft with experienced pilots, it might just work. "Beginning Phase 2, Amanda announced, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced precision. "Sarah, I need you to deploy the speed brakes to exactly 15%. Not full deployment, just 15%. "That'll increase our descent rate," Sarah protested. "Initially, yes, but watch what happens when we combine it with asymmetric aileron deflection." Amanda adjusted the aileron trim, creating a subtle rolling moment that the aircraft's stability systems automatically countered. The result was a complex interaction of forces that actually improved their lift-to-drag ratio while creating a controlled side slip that bled energy more efficiently. "Son of a bitch," Hawk muttered, as he watched their glide path improve on the navigation display. "It's actually working." The aircraft felt different now, flying in a slightly crabbed attitude that would normally indicate a problem, but was actually optimizing their aerodynamic efficiency. To the passengers, it felt like they were sliding sideways through the air, which was exactly what they were doing. In the cabin, Tommy Rodriguez pressed his face to the window, watching the ground grow larger below them. "Mom always said airplanes can't fall out of the sky," he whispered to himself, trying to be brave. Maria Santos noticed his fear and sat beside him. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Tommy. I'm flying to see my dad in Washington. He's in the Army." "My husband was in the Army too," Maria said gently. "He always told me that pilots are the best problem solvers in the world. They never give up." In the cockpit, Amanda was proving Maria's husband right. She had pulled up a detailed topographical map of their route, calculating wind patterns and thermal activity that could give them precious additional lift. "There's a ridgeline about 10 miles ahead," she pointed out. "If we time it right, we can catch the updraft from the terrain and gain maybe 500 feet of altitude." "Ridge soaring in a 777, Sarah said with amazement. "They didn't teach that in airline training." "They didn't teach it in military training either," Amanda replied. "This is pure test pilot territory, taking aircraft beyond their design envelope and making them do things the engineers never imagined." The encrypted radio crackled again, but Amanda ignored it. She had made her choice. The lives of 247 people outweighed any classified procedure or national security concern. "Approaching the ridgeline now," Hawk announced. "I can feel the updraft starting to kick in." Amanda watched the vertical speed indicator as they hit the rising air mass created by wind flowing over the terrain. For a few precious moments, their descent rate decreased dramatically, buying them altitude and distance. "Phase 3, she announced. "This is where we really push the boundaries." She began programming the final sequence into the flight management computer, a complex series of control surface movements that would turn the Boeing 777 into something resembling a giant glider, using every available surface to create lift and control their descent. "Emergency vector control engaged," she said, her finger hovering over the execute button. "Once I activate this, there's no going back. The aircraft will fly like nothing you've ever experienced." Hawk looked at her steadily. "Do it," Amanda pressed the button, and Flight 847 began to fly like a machine possessed, every surface working in harmony to cheat gravity and buy them the distance they needed to reach safety. Behind them, the encrypted radio continued its urgent calls, but Amanda Hayes had already made her choice between duty and humanity had won. The emergency vector control system transformed Flight 847 into something that defied conventional aviation. The aircraft's control surfaces moved in subtle, coordinated patterns that created microscopic vortices and airflow manipulations, squeezing every possible foot of glide distance from their descent. Amanda watched the flight parameters with the intensity of a surgeon monitoring a patient's vital signs. The system was working, but barely. They were operating at the absolute edge of aerodynamic possibility, where the slightest miscalculation could send them into an unrecoverable spin. "Descent rate holding at 800 feet per minute," Sarah reported, amazement clear in her voice. "We're actually going to make it to Sterling." But Amanda's attention was focused on something else, the engine failure analysis scrolling across her tablet. The more she studied the data, the more convinced she became that this wasn't random terrorism. The sabotage was too precise, too targeted. "Hawk, I need to show you something," she said, pulling up the engine monitoring data. "Look at the failure sequence again. Both engines were destroyed, but the timing and methods were different." She pointed to the telemetry traces. Number 2 engine shows classic signs of an internal explosive device, probably a small charge placed in the combustion chamber. But number 1, she highlighted a different section of data. Number 1 was destroyed by an external electromagnetic pulse. EMP, Hawk's eyes widened. "That's military technology." "Exactly. Someone used 2 different sabotage methods to ensure total power loss. This wasn't about bringing down a random airliner. This was about bringing down this specific flight. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Amanda's mind raced through the possibilities. Her tablet contained flight test data worth billions to foreign governments. The adaptive energy management system alone could revolutionize military aviation if it fell into the wrong hands. "They're after me," she said quietly. "Or more specifically, after what I'm carrying." She gestured to her briefcase, still secured under seat 32B. "That tablet contains classified research data. If a foreign intelligence service discovered I was traveling commercially, they'd sabotage the aircraft to make it look like an accident," Hawk finished grimly. "Kill you and steal the data in the wreckage." The radio crackled with another transmission from air traffic control. "American 847, Sterling Regional reports runway in sight. Winds are calm. Runway 27 clear for emergency landing." "Sterling Regional, American 847, we have the field in sight," Hawk responded, requesting emergency vehicles standing by. Through the windscreen, they could see the small regional airport growing larger ahead of them. The single runway looked impossibly short after years of flying into major airports, but it was their only chance. "Beginning Phase 4, Amanda announced, her hands moving to controls that weren't in any commercial pilot's manual. "Final approach energy management." "There's a Phase 4, Sarah asked. "There is now," Amanda replied grimly. "We're going to use the landing gear as an additional control surface." She began programming a sequence that would deploy and retract the landing gear at specific intervals during their approach, using the gear doors and struts to create additional drag and lift as needed to control their descent path. "That's insane," Sarah breathed. "Insane is what we do when conventional procedures aren't enough," Amanda replied, echoing something Robert had once told her during a particularly challenging test flight. In the cabin, passengers could feel the aircraft's unusual behavior. The subtle oscillations and unconventional attitudes created by Amanda's energy management system made it clear that something extraordinary was happening in the cockpit. Maria Santos moved through the aisles, her voice calm and reassuring despite her own fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to Sterling Regional Airport. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position." Tommy Rodriguez clutched his plastic wings, watching the ground rush up toward them through his window. "Are we going to crash?" he asked the elderly woman beside him. "No, sweetheart," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "The pilots know what they're doing." In the cockpit, Amanda was proving that confidence justified. The Phase 4 energy management was working, allowing them to control their approach angle with precision that shouldn't have been possible in an unpowered aircraft. "Gear down," she commanded as they passed through 2,000 feet. The landing gear extended with a reassuring thunk and Amanda immediately began using the gear doors to fine-tune their approach. Opening and closing the doors in sequence created subtle changes in drag that allowed her to adjust their descent rate without traditional engine power. 1,000 feet, Hawk called out. Airspeed 140. Perfect, Amanda said. Sarah, full flaps now. The flaps extended to their maximum setting, transforming the aircraft's wing into a high-lift configuration that would allow them to land at a slower speed. Combined with Amanda's energy management techniques, they had a real chance of stopping on Sterling's short runway. 500 feet, Hawk announced. Runway made. But Amanda's attention was caught by movement on the ground near the airport perimeter. Through binoculars, she could see vehicles that didn't belong to emergency services, black SUVs with government plates positioned to intercept the aircraft after landing. We've got company, she said grimly. Someone's very interested in our cargo. The encrypted radio, which she had switched off earlier, suddenly came alive again through the aircraft's backup communication system. November 7 Alpha Tango. This is General Stone, Pentagon. You are ordered to destroy all classified materials before landing. Confirm compliance. Amanda's hand moved toward the radio, then stopped. General Patricia Stone was the Pentagon official who had classified her research in the first place, who had buried Robert's death under layers of secrecy and national security. Not this time, Amanda whispered, and switched off the backup radio as well. Flight 847 continued its impossible approach, carried by experimental techniques and the determination of 3 pilots who refused to let 247 people die for someone else's secrets. The runway rushed up to meet them, and Amanda prepared for the most challenging landing of her career. 200 feet above Sterling Regional Airport, Flight 847 defied every principle of conventional aviation. The Boeing 777 hung in the air like a massive bird of prey, its control surfaces working in impossible harmony to maintain an approach that should have been aerodynamically impossible. Amanda's hands moved across the controls with surgical precision, each input calculated to extract maximum performance from their powerless aircraft. The emergency vector control system had pushed them beyond the edge of the flight envelope, but they were still flying, still fighting gravity and time. 100 feet, Hawk called out, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Airspeed 130. Through the windscreen, the runway filled their entire field of view. At 6,000 feet long, it was barely adequate for a normal landing, let alone an emergency approach in an aircraft that weighed 300,000 pounds and had no engines. Sarah, prepare for emergency braking sequence, Amanda instructed. The moment we touch down, I need maximum reverse thrust simulation using the spoilers and control surfaces. Reverse thrust simulation? Sarah asked, her hands poised over the controls. We're going to make this aircraft think it has engines by using aerodynamic braking, Amanda explained, her eyes never leaving the approach path. Every surface becomes a brake. Spoilers, flaps, even the rudder. In the cabin, Maria Santos gripped her jump seat as the aircraft's unusual attitude became more pronounced. The passengers could feel they were descending faster than normal, the ground rushing up to meet them with terrifying speed. Tommy Rodriguez pressed his Superman action figure against the window, whispering a prayer his father had taught him. Please let the pilots be heroes, he said quietly. 50 feet above the runway, Amanda made her final calculations. They were coming in hot, too fast for a normal landing, but their energy management had given them exactly what they needed, the speed to reach the runway and the control authority to stop on it. Flare, she commanded. Hawk pulled back on the yoke, raising the aircraft's nose to bleed off speed in the final seconds before touchdown. The Boeing 777 hung suspended for a moment that felt like eternity, balanced between flight and gravity. Then the main landing gear touched the runway with an impact that shook the entire aircraft. Touchdown, Sarah called out, as the nose gear slammed down with bone-jarring force. Amanda immediately activated her emergency braking sequence. Spoilers deployed to maximum, destroying the lift over the wings. The flaps reconfigured to create maximum drag. Even the landing gear doors cycled open and closed in rapid sequence, adding their small contribution to the massive effort to stop 300,000 pounds of aircraft. Brakes, 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 Hawk shouted, standing on the brake pedals with everything he had. The runway markers flashed past their windows in a blur of white paint and asphalt. 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. They were slowing but not fast enough. We're not going to make it, Sarah said, watching the runway end approaching with mathematical certainty. Amanda's mind raced through their remaining options. They had perhaps 10 seconds before they ran out of runway and careened into the grass beyond, where the soft ground would likely cause the landing gear to collapse and the aircraft to cartwheel. "Emergency ground effect braking," she announced, implementing a technique that existed only in theoretical papers and computer simulations. She began cycling the aircraft's control surfaces in a specific pattern that created turbulent airflow beneath the wings, destroying the ground effect that was helping to keep them airborne. The technique was dangerous. If she miscalculated, they could lose control entirely, but it was their only chance. The aircraft shuddered as the airflow beneath the wings became chaotic, creating additional drag that helped slow their forward momentum. The nose gear compressed and extended rhythmically as Amanda used every available surface to create resistance. 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet. The end of the runway loomed ahead like a cliff edge. "Come on," Hawk muttered, fighting to keep the aircraft straight as the experimental braking techniques created asymmetric forces that wanted to send them careening off the center line. 5,500 feet. The aircraft was slowing dramatically now, Amanda's techniques working in concert with conventional braking to bring them under control. 6,000 feet, the end of the runway. Flight 847 came to a stop with less than 50 feet of pavement remaining. For a moment, the cockpit was silent except for the sound of their own breathing and the distant wail of approaching emergency vehicles. They had done the impossible, landed a powerless commercial aircraft using techniques that existed nowhere in any manual. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hawk's voice came over the intercom, steady despite everything they had just experienced. "Welcome to Sterling, Colorado. Please remain seated while we complete our shutdown procedures." In the cabin, the silence was broken by scattered applause that quickly grew into thunderous ovation. Passengers hugged each other, cried with relief, and looked toward the cockpit with expressions of awe and gratitude. Tommy Rodriguez held up his Superman action figure and grinned. "I knew they were heroes," he announced to anyone who would listen, but Amanda's attention was focused on the black SUVs racing toward their aircraft from the airport perimeter. Through the cockpit windows, she could see armed figures deploying around the plane, their movements coordinated and professional. "We're not safe yet," she said grimly. "Someone still wants what I'm carrying, and they're not going to let a successful landing stop them." She reached for her briefcase, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. They had saved 247 lives, but the secrets in her tablet were still worth killing for. And the people surrounding their aircraft looked very much like they were prepared to do exactly that. The emergency vehicles arrived first, fire trucks, ambulances, and airport security racing toward Flight 847 with lights flashing and sirens wailing. But Amanda's trained eyes were focused on the black SUVs that had positioned themselves strategically around the aircraft, their occupants moving with military precision. "Those aren't federal marshals," she said grimly, watching armed figures take positions near the aircraft exits. "They're contractors." Hawk followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. After 25 years in military aviation, he recognized the bearing and equipment of private military operators, the kind of people who worked in the shadows where official government agencies couldn't operate. "What exactly is on that tablet?" he asked. Amanda's jaw tightened. "The future of American air superiority. And apparently, someone's willing to kill for it." In the cabin, passengers were beginning to stand and gather their belongings, unaware that their ordeal was far from over. Maria Santos moved through the aisles, helping elderly passengers and ensuring everyone was prepared for evacuation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced over the intercom, "please remain seated until the captain gives the all-clear for deplaning. Emergency personnel are conducting standard safety checks." Tommy Rodriguez pressed his face to the window, watching the emergency vehicles with wide-eyed fascination. "Look at all the fire trucks," he exclaimed to the elderly woman beside him. "They came to make sure we're safe." If only it were that simple, Amanda thought. The radio crackled with a new voice, calm, professional, and utterly cold. "Flight 847, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, Department of Defense. Dr. Hayes, you are ordered to surrender all classified materials immediately upon deplaning." Amanda recognized the name. Colonel Webb was General Stone's enforcer, the man who cleaned up messes when official channels weren't sufficient. His presence here meant the Pentagon was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to recover her research. "They're not going to let us just walk away," she said to Hawk and Sarah. The moment I step off this aircraft with that briefcase, people are going to die. Sarah looked confused. But we're civilians now. They can't just... They can and they will, Amanda interrupted. National security trumps civilian law when the stakes are high enough. And what I'm carrying, she gestured to her briefcase, it's worth more than all our lives combined. Through the cockpit windows, they could see passengers beginning to move toward the exits as flight attendants prepared for evacuation. The emergency slides were being deployed, and soon 247 innocent people would be walking into a potential war zone. We need to get them out of here, Hawk said. Whatever this is about, those passengers don't deserve to be caught in the middle. Amanda made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She opened her briefcase and removed the tablet, its screen displaying terabytes of classified research data. Years of her life, billions of dollars in development costs, and the key to maintaining American technological superiority, all contained in a device no larger than a book. There's another way, she said quietly, but it means destroying everything I've worked for. She pulled up a specific program on the tablet, a military-grade encryption protocol that would not only delete the data, but physically destroy the storage medium itself. Once activated, the tablet would become an expensive paperweight, and years of research would be lost forever. You'd do that? Sarah asked. Destroy your own work? Amanda looked out at the passengers beginning to evacuate, at Tommy Rodriguez clutching his Superman action figure, at Maria Santos helping an elderly man down the emergency slide. These people had trusted her to save their lives, and she had. Now she had to protect them from the consequences of her past. Robert died because we pushed too hard, too fast, she said, her finger hovering over the deletion protocol. Maybe some secrets are too dangerous to exist. But before she could activate the program, the aircraft's main door burst open. Armed figures in tactical gear stormed aboard, moving with practiced efficiency toward the cockpit. Passengers screamed and dove for cover as the peaceful evacuation turned into a military operation. Dr. Amanda Hayes, a voice called from the cabin. You are ordered to surrender all classified materials and submit to federal custody. Amanda looked at Hawk and Sarah, seeing her own determination reflected in their eyes. They had saved this aircraft together, and they weren't going to let it end with innocent people being terrorized. How many rounds you figure they're carrying? Hawk asked quietly, his military training reasserting itself. Enough, Amanda replied, but they won't risk damaging the tablet. That gives us leverage. She stood and moved toward the cockpit door, the tablet held prominently in her hands. Colonel Webb, she called out, I assume you're here for this. A figure in black tactical gear appeared in the cockpit doorway, tall, lean, with the cold eyes of someone who had done terrible things in service of his country. Colonel Marcus Webb looked exactly like what he was, a professional killer dressed in government authority. Dr. Hayes, you've caused considerable trouble today. I saved 247 lives today, Amanda replied steadily. That seems more important than protecting classified procedures. Webb's smile was arctic. National security isn't a democracy, Doctor. Your personal feelings about the value of civilian lives are irrelevant. Amanda held up the tablet, her thumb positioned over the deletion protocol. One touch, Colonel. Everything disappears forever. Years of research, billions in development costs, the entire adaptive energy management program gone. For the first time, Webb's composure cracked slightly. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Amanda said, and meant it. In the standoff that followed, with armed contractors surrounding the aircraft and passengers huddled in terror, Amanda Hayes faced the choice that would define not just her future, but the future of everyone aboard Flight 847. The tablet screen glowed in her hands, waiting for her decision. The standoff in the cockpit stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Amanda held the tablet with steady hands, her thumb poised over the deletion protocol, while Colonel Webb's cold eyes calculated odds and alternatives. Behind him, tactical operators maintained their positions throughout the cabin, their weapons trained on passengers who had already endured more terror than any civilian should face. You're bluffing, Webb said finally, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. You wouldn't destroy years of your own work, wouldn't I? Amanda's smile was grim. I've already violated my security clearance, exposed classified procedures, and used experimental techniques to save civilian lives. What's one more breach of protocol? Through the cockpit windows, she could see more vehicles arriving. Legitimate FBI and FAA investigators who would complicate Webb's unofficial operation. Time was running out for everyone. Dr. Hayes, Webb said, his tone shifting to something resembling reasonableness, you don't understand the bigger picture. This technology could save thousands of military lives. The applications for combat aircraft alone could also be used to kill thousands more, Amanda interrupted. I've seen what happens when experimental technology is pushed beyond safe limits. Robert Kellerman died because we were so focused on what we could do that we never stopped to ask if we should do it. In the cabin, Tommy Rodriguez had somehow slipped away from the evacuation area and was hiding behind a row of seats, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. His Superman action figure was clutched tightly in his small hands, and Amanda could see him whispering something, probably the prayer his father had taught him. The sight of the frightened child made her decision crystal clear. Here's what's going to happen, Colonel, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded experimental aircraft and faced death in the Nevada desert. You're going to order your men to stand down and allow these passengers to evacuate safely. In exchange, I'll give you the tablet, intact. Webb's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse? Amanda's thumb moved closer to the deletion key. Then you get nothing, and I make sure every news outlet in America knows that the Pentagon sent armed contractors to terrorize the survivors of a commercial aviation disaster. You're forgetting something, Doctor, Webb said softly. You're still bound by your security oath. Revealing classified information to the media would be treason. Would it? Amanda asked. Because I'm pretty sure using experimental military technology to save civilian lives falls under emergency protocols. And I'm absolutely certain that threatening those same civilians with weapons violates about a dozen federal laws. Hawk stepped forward, his captain's authority filling the cramped cockpit. Colonel, I don't know what kind of operation you're running here, but you've got about 5 minutes before the FBI takes control of this scene. Whatever you're planning to do, you better do it fast. Webb's radio crackled with urgent transmissions from his team leaders. The legitimate federal response was arriving in force, and his window for unofficial action was closing rapidly. Last chance, Colonel, Amanda said. Stand down your men, let these people go home to their families, and I'll hand over the tablet. Keep threatening innocent civilians, and I'll destroy everything and take my chances with a federal jury. The silence stretched for 10 heartbeats, 20, 30. Then Webb spoke into his radio. All units, stand down. Allow passenger evacuation to proceed. Amanda watched through the windows as the tactical operators lowered their weapons and stepped back from the emergency slides. Passengers began moving again, some crying with relief, others helping their fellow travelers reach safety. Tommy Rodriguez emerged from his hiding place and ran toward the exit, pausing only to look back at the cockpit, with something approaching hero worship in his young eyes. The tablet, Doctor. Hayes? Webb said, extending his hand. Amanda looked at the device one final time, seeing years of her life reflected in its dark screen. The adaptive energy management system, the emergency vector control protocols, the energy optimization algorithms that had saved Flight 847, all of it would disappear into the black world of classified military research. But as she watched the last passengers reach safety, she knew she had made the right choice. One condition, she said. This technology is never used offensively. Research only, defensive applications only. No weapon systems, no attack aircraft modifications. Webb's smile was cold. You're hardly in a position to dictate terms, Doctor. Actually, I am, Amanda replied, and activated a hidden subroutine on the tablet. I just uploaded a complete copy of all research data to a secure server with instructions to release everything to the public if I don't check in every 72 hours. Kill me, disappear me, or use this technology for offensive purposes, and every aviation engineer in the world will have access to classified American military research. Webb's face went white. You wouldn't? I just did, Amanda said, and handed him the tablet. Congratulations, Colonel, you've got your technology back. But now you've also got a very strong incentive to keep me alive and happy. She walked past him toward the cabin, where Hawk and Sarah were waiting. Gentlemen, it's been an honor flying with you, but I think our adventure is just beginning. As they reached the emergency exit, Amanda paused to look back at the cockpit, where they had performed miracles with mathematics and determination. Flight 847 would never fly again. The stress of their emergency landing had likely caused structural damage that would ground the aircraft permanently. But 247 people were walking away from what should have been a catastrophic crash, and that was worth any price. "Dr. Hayes," Webb called after her. "This isn't over." Amanda smiled without turning around. "No, Colonel, it's just beginning." And with that she stepped out into the Colorado sunshine, leaving behind the shadows of her classified past and walking toward an uncertain but honest future. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Denver International Airport as Captain Amanda Hayes completed her pre-flight inspection of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. 7 years had transformed her from a woman haunted by secrets into someone who had found peace in the honest work of commercial aviation. "Beautiful morning for flying," her co-pilot, First Officer Michael Chen, observed as he joined her beside the aircraft. "Every morning's beautiful when you're not carrying classified cargo," Amanda replied, with a smile that had taken years to feel genuine. The transformation hadn't been easy. After the Sterling incident, Amanda had endured months of congressional hearings, Pentagon investigations, and media scrutiny. Colonel Webb had tried repeatedly to have her charged with treason, but public opinion and the testimony of 247 grateful passengers had made her untouchable. The Adaptive Energy Management System had been declassified and adapted for civilian use, revolutionizing emergency procedures for commercial aviation. Amanda's techniques were now taught in flight schools around the world, credited with saving hundreds of lives in subsequent emergencies. But the real victory was simpler. She could sleep at night. "Captain Hayes," a young voice called from the jet bridge. Amanda turned to see a teenager in an Air Force Academy uniform, approaching with obvious nervousness. He was tall, lean, with the earnest expression of someone who had grown up hearing stories about heroes. "Tommy Rodriguez," she said with genuine warmth, recognizing the boy who had clutched a Superman action figure through the most terrifying flight of his young life. "Look at you, all grown up and ready to serve." Tommy grinned, the same infectious smile that had charmed flight attendants 7 years earlier. "I wanted to thank you again, Captain, for saving us, for showing me what real heroes look like." Amanda felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she encountered one of her passengers from Flight 847. "You don't need to thank me, Tommy. You and your fellow passengers gave me something more valuable than I gave you." "What's that? A reason to be proud of what I do?" Tommy nodded seriously, then pulled something from his pocket, a worn Superman action figure, the same one he had carried on that terrifying day. "I wanted you to have this. It's been my good luck charm ever since the flight, but I think it belongs with you now." Amanda accepted the small plastic figure with hands that trembled slightly. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Besides, I don't need Superman anymore. I learned that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear pilot wings." After Tommy left to catch his connecting flight to Colorado Springs, Amanda stood quietly on the tarmac, holding the action figure and remembering. The years since Sterling had brought their share of pain and revelation, Hawk Morrison had retired from commercial aviation and opened a flight training school in Montana, where he taught emergency procedures to a new generation of pilots. His students called him Miracle Hawk, after word spread about his role in the Sterling landing. Sarah Chen had been promoted to captain and now flew international routes, carrying with her the confidence that came from having faced the impossible and prevailed. She sent Amanda Christmas cards every year, always signed "Your Wingman, Sarah." Maria Santos had left commercial aviation to become a trauma counselor, helping other survivors of aviation emergencies. She credited her experience on Flight 847 with showing her the importance of remaining calm in crisis. But not everyone had found peace. Colonel Marcus Webb had been quietly reassigned to a desk job in the Pentagon basement after the congressional hearings revealed the extent of his unauthorized operation. The tactical contractors who had stormed Flight 847 had been disbanded, their actions officially disavowed by the Department of Defense. General Patricia Stone had taken early retirement, her career destroyed by the revelation that she had ordered Amanda to let the aircraft crash rather than expose classified technology. She now lived in bitter isolation, her service record forever tainted by her willingness to sacrifice civilian lives for military secrets. The price of secrecy, Amanda had learned, was often paid by those who valued secrets more than souls. "Captain Hayes," Michael Chen's voice brought her back to the present. "We're ready for boarding." Amanda slipped Tommy's Superman figure into her flight bag and walked toward the aircraft that would carry her and 183 passengers safely to their destinations. No classified cargo, no experimental procedures, no life-or-death emergencies. just the honest work of moving people from one place to another. As she settled into the captain's seat and began her checklist, Amanda thought about Robert Kellerman, whose death had taught her that some prices were too high to pay for progress. She thought about the passengers of Flight 847 who had trusted her with their lives and given her a chance at redemption. Most of all, she thought about the choice she had made in that cockpit 7 years ago to value human life over military secrets, to choose transparency over classification, to be a pilot instead of a weapon. Denver Tower, United 629 requesting taxi clearance, she transmitted, her voice steady and confident. United 629 Denver Tower, taxi to runway 25 left. Have a safe flight, Captain. Thank you, Tower. It's a beautiful day to fly. And as Flight 629 lifted off into the Colorado sky, Amanda Hayes smiled, knowing that she was finally, truly free. The ghosts of her classified past had been laid to rest, replaced by the simple joy of doing what she had always been meant to do, bringing people safely home. In her flight bag, Tommy's Superman action figure kept watch, a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroism comes not from superhuman powers, but from ordinary people who choose to do the right thing when everything is on the line. 7 years later, Amanda Hayes was still flying, and she had never been happier. As Flight 629 disappeared into the vast Colorado sky, it carried with it more than just passengers and crew. It carried the enduring spirit of human courage that transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary triumphs. The story of Amanda Hayes and Flight 847 reminds us that heroism isn't found in superhuman abilities or perfect circumstances. True heroism emerges when ordinary people face impossible choices and decide that protecting others matters more than protecting themselves. It lives in the split-second decision to reveal classified secrets to save innocent lives, in the steady hands of pilots who refuse to give up when all seems lost, and in the quiet strength of passengers who trust strangers with their very existence. Amanda's journey from a woman haunted by classified ghosts to a captain who found peace in honest service teaches us that redemption is always possible. Her willingness to sacrifice years of research and risk her freedom for the lives of 247 strangers proves that the greatest victories aren't measured in technological advancement or military superiority, but in the simple act of bringing people safely home. The experimental techniques that saved Flight 847 have since revolutionized aviation safety, but the real legacy of that terrifying day isn't found in flight manuals or training procedures. It's found in the lives that were saved, the families that remained whole, and the reminder that when we choose humanity over secrecy, courage over compliance, we become the heroes our world desperately needs. Tommy Rodriguez now serves his country with honor, inspired by the example of pilots who showed him that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear wings. Maria Santos continues to help trauma survivors find their strength. Hawk Morrison trains the next generation of aviators to face the impossible with determination and skill. Their stories continue because 3 people in a cockpit chose to value human life above all else. What did this story mean to you? Did it remind you of the heroes in your own life, the teachers, first responders, healthcare workers, or everyday people who choose to serve others when it matters most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of courage and redemption touched your heart, write the word wings to show you made it to the end and help us reach others who need to hear this message of hope. The sky is vast, but the human spirit is vaster still. Sometimes we all need reminding that heroes walk among us, ready to rise when the moment demands courage. Thank you for flying with us on this journey. Check out the cards below for more inspiring stories of ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when everything was on the line. Keep your wings spread wide and remember, every landing is a new beginning.